we're lucky enough to have Kirby Sefo with us, who is a graphic designer and also a Wallaroo. We can't leave out that detail. But from a design perspective, Kirby has given us some time to come and have a look at some of the posters that were developed for our sport development systems subject. So we've pulled out a couple of the really good ones from the students, and we're going to talk through what are some of those design considerations that we should be thinking about to make sure that our posters are really impactful and easy to engage with. So, Kirby, you were telling me before about some, I guess, considerations or some context in the communication process. Would you be able to share with us what are the kind of things that you think of when you come to something as a designer?
Sure. So, thanks for having me. So, I think some of the things definitely to consider in this is the fact that you're working in the sporting industry, so you have to consider your audience. A lot of people involved in sport are volunteers or supporters, so you have to understand that where people place their priority, so how you choose to communicate, you have to understand that they could be quite time restricted, so you need to get your message across. In saying that, we all communicate differently, so I think understanding some people are data digital driven, so they like a lot of content, they like to read a lot, they like statistics. Some people are visual, so they require just imagery, they need simple designs. Another sort of communicator is it's gone from my head, kinesthetic, so the emotion, so they're driven by, again, visual, but also being captured by emotion, so that's important.
So it might be the feeling that something gives you?
Yeah, and that can be achieved through different imagery or words, so that's something to take into consideration, probably how you communicate and how you're intending to communicate to your audience.
Yeah, okay, great. All right, so we've got a couple of examples here we're going to walk through. We're going to start with Carly Burge's poster, which looked at sideline behaviour at youth sport, which is a really important topic, right? Because I guess it's a growing issue about how parents kind of behave at sport and how that impacts on kids coming back to sport. So I really liked Carly's design. She had some great information as well. But from your perspective, Kirby, what are the kind of things that we might work on with this to make it, engaging and really get to the point with people?
Cool. So I've checked out this one in a little bit more detail, and the first thing that I noticed visually is that you're quite drawn to it for the colours, and also, whether it was intended or not, the fact that it's sideline and it's sort of divided up by white sidelines, what it comes across to me. Anyway, so visually I think it's quite appealing. It's
kind of captured the symbolism of sport and what we're communicating. When we spoke to Carly, though, it wasn't intended. No. So we've accidentally hit something really nice there. But something to think about is that kind of symbolism and how we're tying it to the theme that we're communicating in. Yep.
That's right. And it's quite simple. And then you've got the different sports balls, which are also quite simplistic use of icons there, I guess. So that all ties in as well. I did make a point of the layout. So the main part that sort of struck me was that there's different layouts on different sections, and to an audience or a viewer that can be quite confusing. They lose their focus, they lose which part of information they're trying to read, and they also lose which piece of information is important or not. So I suggested that in all the yellow strips is the more texty kind of information, and again I pulled that black on yellow is a lot easier to read, so it makes sense to put your text on that kind of colour palette, and then perhaps in the blue is where we simplify it and have the questions or the stats or down the bottom the recommendations. So just being smart in how you choose to lay it out. I also suggested to Carly that you have one use of symbols. So rather than in the top yellow strip having simple symbols and then a colourful one and then a range of different ones, again that goes back to a bit of confusion and from the viewer's point of view, because it's inconsistent, so you're not sort of sure what message she's trying to achieve there.
And I guess as well, when I'm looking at it, Kirby, one of the things that I take away is that I'm interpreting text, and then I'm trying to interpret what the icon is as well. And so each additional icon that's presented is another thing I'm trying to interpret in the communication. Yeah,
and then lastly, I think with Carly's one is that the use of text. So, for example, the heading is sideline behaviour at youth sports. So we already know that. When we have on the second yellow panel, it says types of parents at youth sporting events. We already know that it's at youth sports, so you don't need to say that. You could just have types of parents, and that simplifies it again. At the top, you could just have background key points is fine. Reasons why parents display anger as a heading in the third blue panel. You could just have displays of anger. So you really don't need to overcomplicate the heading because it's quite self-explanatory, and it's your job to sort of clarify that and how you use images, and then what sort of blurb you want to write about it. Sorry, did suggest one more thing for Carly. Having a reference point at the bottom. So the idea of a poster is that you've not put your entire assignment onto the poster. It's just not possible, and people won't be interested in that. So from a wider marketing strategy, you would perhaps have a website or a point of contact at the bottom that would simply just say, for more information, you can access this here, and that way you don't have to put it all on.
Put everything on. Yeah, okay. So I guess it's kind of that call to action, and that's where we get the impact from this kind of communication, isn't it? So we've presented this, and then now this is what you can do. You know, your next step.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
and I think what you've just said there about the headings is really important, and to me this highlights, it is a challenge in moving from a report where you might have had all of those headings and then putting it into something like this. And really you want, like in our report, we might think about the sections individually, but then when it comes to the post, we need to be thinking about them individually, but also overall as well, right. Isn't it?
Yeah.
So it really becomes that one thing that you're trying to unify in one go. Thanks, Carly.
Great.
All right, next we have Stefan Gagel's poster on esports and its sponsors. So Stefan was very passionate about this topic, and I think it comes through in his poster as well. And look, I liked it because it had great information, and you could engage with it well, but Stefan, and I'm sure he'll agree, there were some kind of basic things in terms of design that we skipped over here in this presentation. So Kirby, what do you think about this one? How can we refine this and make it a little bit more impactful?
Yeah, so I think you're right. This one's full of lots of information, and interesting information. Like, I had to skim through it, but I think in terms of a poster, it's far too texty, and there'd be perhaps different ways you could represent that information to achieve the same result, but just steer away from all that information overload. I know my initial reaction to this was the image at the top, so I wasn't quite sure what that was, and obviously that's because I don't have a background in esports, but that did draw me to say, what is esports? So I think you've got the right connection between your top image, and then obviously I think this would be a great brochure. So do you know what I mean? So it was
a bit of a threefold pamphlet or something
like
that.
A DL. Yeah. I think that would be great, but that's obviously not what we're trying to do. So I've just got the relevance in esports, and the top image is great. If we can remove and condense some of the text, that would create some space for you to perhaps insert symbols or other imagery that explains more
as
around
you're chatting through, Kirby, about imagery, I've only just noticed, and I've had a look at this poster a few times, and I've only just recognised that there's an image behind the text.
Yeah.
So it's taken me probably a half dozen looks to see that, and to me that image that's behind the text is probably something that's a bit more explanatory, isn't it, as to what esports might be.
Yeah. I think, and again, I'm
just getting lost behind the words.
Well, I think again, from someone who has got no understanding of esports, I, at a glance, would look at that background information, and to me it would perhaps suggest like a lecture theatre or conference, people sitting at screens. If you don't have that understanding, you're not going to connect with that for the fact that the message is around esports. So I think it's important to remember that your audience or people you're trying to engage with will give you a window of about 3 seconds to look at something visual, and if it resonates or if it sparks interest, they'll stay there and they'll take in the information. Whereas if they look at it and it doesn't make any kind of connection with them, they won't waste their time to read that information, regardless of how great the information is or not. So so I think you may need to be selective, and you might have to be slightly more cutthroat with some of the text you want to use. And again, perhaps going back to what we said with Carly's, is that have that reference point at the bottom, a website for more information. It can be accessed here, and that's where you'd put all this text, all the breakdown of text. Looking at I just feel like the text has been the assignment put onto the bottom 2/3 of the page. I would rejig your text and say in your executive summary, you just don't have summaries on posters. You just have perhaps like facts, like the things that you've made bold. Whether you want stakeholders, players, fans, you can just have those as headings and then have a point for more information go here. It's not going to grab someone's attention for long enough at a standing point.
To stand and read a paragraph. Yep.
Yeah, okay. Just sort of, that's what the text is. You're going to have to rework the text, I would say. In terms of the layout, I don't think it's too bad, bar the this panel at the bottom right. Yeah. So I think the fact that you've divided it into 3 sort of sections is great, and that's a good starting point. I just think perhaps the alignment, you've got the executive summary is all centred for an alignment. The key findings beneath it is aligned to the left. And then the viewership stats seem to be centred again, perhaps. Background is aligned to the left. So it's just about being consistent across the board, because it goes back to, say, the first example we looked at. If it's too confusing to follow, people aren't going to be interested in reading the information, regardless of how interesting it is. And then probably just on a visual thing as well, the colours of the ticks and the crosses and then the arrows up in the top right, there's just sort of no consistency. I would say choose a colour palette and only stick to that. So I think you've got in your top image, I don't know why I'm pointing, you've got I can see a lot of reds and blues in that. So where you've got your arrows and your viewership stats, red and blue. So you can have red and blue ticks. I think that would be a good palette to start with, and then perhaps with your layout, 1/3 could be blue, the middle could be red, the outside one could be blue again. So just colour's important. People react to colour. It triggers emotions and that kind of thing. And so I think if you didn't want to break it into colour, perhaps put your headings in red. Don't, shift away from making everything just a black on white sort of black text on a white background. There's just a lot going on, and I think it should be simplified.
Excellent. So hopefully Stefan can take some good pointers away from that, and I think we can learn a lot from that example. The next one that we've got there is Charlie's poster on understanding concussion. And now what I will say, Charlie, is some of the instructions that I gave was thinking about your backgrounds. And so when we have grass as a background, I'm not a huge fan, but I'm not the designer, so I'll let Kirby talk to that.
Yeah, well, I think I understand. Obviously, rugby league. It's obviously a rugby field. So, and if that's what that's what you want to do, I think I can see the connection. So, I think for me is firstly I wrote the colour palette. So, pink and green is it's just not easy on the eyes, and I think pink is perhaps too influential to females, whether we like that or not. It's just
we tie it to women's participation.
We do, and so I think you'd be better off to your headings quite big and bold, and it's in black. So if you could find like a grayscale or charcoal or that kind of symbol for the brain, that might tie into your heading a little better, and also I don't think you'll get the sort of contrast in having a pink on a green background. I've got just the way the text has been laid out. So in the top half, your what is concussion, why is it important, those are all obviously great points, but down below you've got your headings in white boxes. So this goes back to all of the designs so far for the posters, is just being consistent in how you choose to highlight the points. So if they're headings, have all of your headings in a white box, or have all of them without. This one, while it's not as texty, well, it doesn't appear to be, I think it's because the font is so small. So it's quite tricky to read it. You may want to simplify and just reduce the points.
And I guess what I'd say to that, Kirby, from me being the one that marked them, and then also, the point is about this poster communicating something out to an industry audience to let them know about something, but also what they can do about it. And so when we get to the recommendations part, which is probably in terms of priority of importance, is probably one of the most important things, it's pretty hard to engage with as it is presented at the moment.
Yeah, that's I think that's a common theme across all of them, and you guys as the students or the designers, you need to work out where your level of priority lies for the message. Again, going back to who you're communicating to, and how you choose to communicate it, and your level of importance or level of priority, I guess, for the message comes also under that. So probably the text is a little bit too small under your national governing body. It reads a little bit confusing under your parents, athletes governing body, because I don't know, is the graph just for NRL or is the data, you've got 3 headings but it comes across as only 2 text boxes beneath it. So that again can be a bit confusing, or I'm not sure if those actually are headings now that I'm looking at it.
No, I think there are stakeholders, labels for
right.
stakeholders. So it's a little bit, where you're trying to read intuitively as
Yeah.
columns, maybe.
Yeah, right. So I read that from. Yeah. So, and again, as an audience, and I would be a typical audience who's walking past. That's how I read it. So just clarity on how you choose to break up the information. And
again, it's thinking about how it works together as a whole, isn't it? So
yeah, and I mean, personally, key literature findings and concussion data, you could probably wipe that out altogether. Again, like the other two posters, have a reference point, have a website or a point of contact, say for more information, and you can go read about data and literature findings there. It's probably not something that somebody wants to read about looking at a poster, and that way you'd create more space for your stakeholders. That just now negates what I said at the start about headings and boxes. Anyway,
that's like, but I think what this discussion, I mean, it's subjective, isn't it, design? Yes. But I guess there are those clear principles, and so where you've got those maybe 2 points of advice, it all comes back to what we're trying to communicate and who we're communicating to, doesn't it? Yeah. And so when we're composing this kind of stuff, we need to be pretty clear on that, because as we're demonstrating, it can be interpreted in so many different ways, and we kind of lose control. As soon as the poster goes out into the big wide world, we lose control of that.
Yeah.
So we really have to think it through when we're coming to this composition stage.
Yeah, and I think personally, like I quite like the use of the field, and you've got the halfway line through the middle, and I think you could essentially, like, there's a lot of lines on your footy fields and that kind of thing. You could be quite clever and say having the try line and the dead ball line to section off, say, the recommendations at the bottom. You could make use of the lines while it wasn't intended, like on Carly's poster for sidelines, but obviously that's up to you. I just think the main look of this particular poster is perhaps the text is a little bit too small. It's confusing to follow the message, but I think the intention of making that connection between concussion, a rugby field, that kind of thing, on the right track.
Yeah.
It's just the layout, it needs a bit of tweaking for clarity.
Yeah, sure. Great points. Thanks for that. Maybe let's have a look. The next one here is Aaron Goggins' work that he did on the gender wage gap within domestic Australian sport, which Kirby has some personal insights into as a professional female athlete, and also still working as a graphic designer and rugby development person to actually have a wage in sport. So I think this one's interesting to her, and of course the recommendations are important. So what do you have around this one, Kirby? How can we make this it's already, I think it's a really nice aesthetic for me, but how do we make sure that people are going to engage with it and go away and pay women more?
I think you've covered it well. Like, this is, I think visually this is a really great example of not having too much information. You've mixed it up with different text boxes, and there's stats on the left hand side. There's not a overload of information to check out. Obviously the use of pink is relative to relative to females. I would be careful with too much pink, so you might want to perhaps change the colour of the border, or just even just have a play around of that. There's sometimes it can be you'll hit your female advocates saying they're putting this into a box by making everything pink. So just
the concept that you talked about a few weeks ago was pink and shrink, that I hadn't heard of before. So it is something, yes, that we symbolically tie to women's participation, but it can also for a lot of people be quite polarising, right? So we're not all pink and shrinkers. So those kind of things, need to be used with consideration.
I don't think it's too over the top, to be honest, but I'd just perhaps be mindful of it, that you'll get your people who strongly believe in pay parity or equality and that kind of thing, who will just not even look at it because it's all pink. So that's just
Really important things to know, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's
unpack as we're going through the process.
Yeah, it's good to take into consideration, particularly when you're covering perhaps topics of controversy.
Yeah.
You just have to. It's hard to not offend people. You're always going to offend someone, but you can minimise it.
Offend the least amount of people, and then the other side of it is that we actually want to positively impact people.
That's
so
right.
how do we think about that?
You still want to make an impact, and you know what? Like, your message might be to spark up a conversation by causing a little bit of offence, and if that's how you want to present it, knock yourself out. So I think it's, I don't think it's a massive issue to worry about. In terms of just the only thing I'd probably tweak in this one is a few little design elements. So the use of your logos under your stakeholders, under Fox Sports and AIS and all those kind of organisations. Within the organisations and branding, they actually have they'll have specifications, so you wouldn't be able to place the logos that close together. And if you look at any sort of publication and that kind of thing, it's been designed to say, the edge of the Fox Sport logo must have 10 mils either side. So I would probably just reduce the size of the logos and keep them in a line, but just spread them out a little bit, because it's a little bit busy, but also design wise
You need to be compliant.
Yeah. And then that's the same. So you've got your AFL, that one's fine. With the other one, I'm not sure what logo it is, but also you can't crop logos in terms of branding and specs and that kind of thing. So whether you just want to use a symbol or reduce the size of that logo, but I think if you're going to, like the AFL one, place it on a white background so it's the same. The image at the bottom with the 3 women, I think that's great, but I would probably use symbols, or so you don't have just a white box on a grey box. It's just aesthetically not as pleasing. So you may even choose to just put in the female gender symbol in pink if you want to. That will tie in the fact that, again, it's female driven. I just think your whole poster is quite simple. It's simplified, and it's kind of used symbols, like in terms of arrows and graphs and that kind of thing. So I think that may tie in a little bit better than having pink and grey, different tones of grey, and then just randomly in the bottom left corner you've got all these 3 girls in different colours. It's just it sticks out, but not in a good way. And other than that, I think it's quite good. I'd probably bring, this is just me and a design background, I would bring the stakeholder influence box up so it matches the box to the left.
Yeah,
okay. So just work on that alignment there. But other than that, I think it's great. Perhaps the heading, gender wage, extend the grey box out to the left so it lines up with the key statistics, and same on the right hand side. But other than that, I think it's quite a good
layout.
It's good layout. So that's kind of it. I think just to recap for all 4 of them, the main thing I would say for you all is you need to consider your audience, and remember, when you see a poster in the street, at a bus stop, on the sporting field, while you're waiting for a coffee, what are the things that draws you in to actually read it? And you just have to be mindful of how you communicate and how you like to be communicated to, and that'll probably give you a bit of direction as to how you might refine some of your designs, and just your level of priority or the message that you're actually trying to convey. So If there is something important, obviously put it at the top, or put it in a box, or make it known that that's your message, and then everything else can sort of branch off that.
Awesome, thanks Kirby. I think that'll be really useful for these guys and also for our students that come to this assessment in the future. So thank you.
You're welcome. Good luck.